They are loyalfans.com, kink.com, clipsforsale.com, shinybound.com, and feetforcash.com. And here we have our beautiful Angie Gunn, who is one of our, she's based in Portland, certified sex therapist and licensed clinical social worker. Angie's been working with Pineapple Support for a little while, so some of you have come to our previous events may already recognize her. But I'm going to hand you straight over, Angie, because I know we're running a little bit late today, and I thank you ever so much for joining us. But she's going to be presenting on, oh, I've forgotten what it was again.
Neurobiology and kink.
That's it. That's neurology. Right. I love you, and I'll hand over to our fabulous audience. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you so much. And I'm also having technical issues, so I apologize in advance. My slides are not showing. And so we're just going to go with it. And I'll share my screen instead, and you'll get just a different view of the slides, which is not ideal, but we're just going to go with it because we're a little bit behind. So I'd love to just have everybody take a second, and I'm not sure how engaging folks are, but if you are able to engage, I would love to have some conversation, some engagement of some sort. So I'm gonna pin my face. If folks want to use the raise hand feature or other features, feel free to give me your feedback and your responses. And the first question that I want to start with is, if you could imagine your ideal kink scene. So just give yourself a second to maybe close your eyes, maybe take a breath, and think about what it might be like to be in your ideal scene. Who might be there? What kind of elements might be there? And I want you to imagine this is a scene that's going to be healing for you in some way. It's going to be transformative to your body, to your soul, to your brain, to your heart. When the scene is over, what do you notice in your body? What sensations, what emotions, what feelings do you notice that would indicate to you that it had its achieved goal? What would be happening during the scene in terms of what would you be noticing? Sensations, emotions, experiences that would indicate to you that it was being effective. And maybe feel free to post in the chat box if you want to share your response. What would you be noticing in your body, in your brain, in your heart, if this was a healing experience for you? Okay. Easy breath, comfort, yeah. Contentment, yeah. Tension release, enhance sensations, closer to someone. Mm-hmm. Zero thoughts, safety, shame, no shame. Yeah, beautiful answers. And so I think one of the maybe hardest questions for folks then is, how do I get there? You know, sometimes it's kind of a fluke. And we don't have a ton of time today, so I'm not giving you as much of my backstory, but I've been in the kink scene for about 15 years. I've been a sex therapist and a sex worker of various capacities for most of that time. And I have often tried to figure out, right, how to make every experience I'm having for myself as a trauma survivor and as someone who has regular trauma activation, how to make those experiences meaningful and grounded and connected for me, as well as for those I'm working with in clinical spaces. So I hope to answer some of those questions today. I have a really beautiful PowerPoint that's not working, so I'm going to instead give you some images that I'm just going to share via screen, and we will do our best with that. So the first question as I go into it is this idea of, how do you know when your body is having a trauma activation versus a sensory activation that's going to feel good for you? Anybody figure out how they begin to make that distinction? So checking that you're making sure you're in connection with the person you're with. Mm-hmm. The pain stops. Feeling good? Yeah. Any other indicators to you that it's suddenly shifted out of that space of this is really great and healing to now this is causing me more harm? Okay. Yeah, so just feel like you're not in your body anymore. You're maybe in a flashback or in some kind of memory space that's hard. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. One of the interesting things about this work, the intersection between kink and trauma, is that, so first I want to give a caveat. Trauma is really unique and personal. Everyone's experiences are incredibly different. So please have a therapist or someone skilled in trauma work to support you through the process. Please just don't go willy-nilly on your own. Second thing, when I think about kink and trauma, I have a similar definition, which is what led me to doing this work of the intersection of the two. And that definition is literally anything that pushes our erotic, emotional, and sensory edges, and doing so in a healing way. So when you're thinking about again, I will have slides for you at the end because they're not working currently. When you think about trauma, definition of trauma, I'm sure many of you kind of already know this or hear this consistently, but trauma is stress that overwhelms our ability to cope. Right? And then if you think about the concept of kink, where you're trying to find these erotic edges, it's a really similar concept, right? So you're trying to find where are those spaces where there's both hotness and eroticism and pleasure and maybe pain and deep stimulation, as well as a little bit of maybe emotional and psychological activation. And we're trying to meet that edge where the stress becomes overwhelming, but not get there, right? So kink gives us a space to practice that and play with that in a really beautiful sandbox. I think of kink often as this like amazing sandbox that is a container for exploring all of the kind of like, what's the term? It helps us to create a space for recreating a sense of safety with others and within ourselves, right? So when you can clearly outline, this is the frame, these are all the toys we can put in that frame, this is how I want to feel, these are all the boundaries, and there's high levels of communication, you can create a space where that scene has limitless potential to be transformative for both parties. Right? Yeah. So I define safety. That's often a conversation in kink, right? What is this safety thing? How do you know? We think about, RAC and all of the kind of like safety acronyms. And, we're moving more towards a place where we can never guarantee someone's safety, right? We can't guarantee that someone is going to feel always safe in their body. And sometimes we want to push against that safety edge, right? So I define safety as a sense of belonging within ourselves. I know me, I know my body, I know my reactivity, I know these parts of me to the extent that I can, and I'm working with them effectively. And safety with others, meaning belonging with others, right? So it's this place where I both can feel safe and grounded in my body, but I can also do that with other people and do so in a way that I can have my words, I can have my boundaries, and I can communicate when something is pushing against an edge for me, right? So if you are a person who is still in a place in terms of managing your trauma where you don't have your words in play, right? If you dissociate to the point where you don't have your power, if you have you struggled with knowing what your body's communicating to you, like you don't know, is this sensation bad? Is this, I'm not sure, is this pleasure? If you're not in tune with your body, I would say you want to do that work first. That's the precursor to doing any kind of kink for trauma work, because your body is your anchor to safety. And we are always responsible for our own well-being. You're probably hearing this in other talks this weekend or this week. But if you don't know your own body's cues to tell you, what is this thing? And how do I know when we've crossed the edge versus we're still close by? And we notice this a lot in kink spaces when I've done DMing and other kinds of work, that you see these spaces where like someone's so in the moment of eroticism and pleasure and excitement and joy and all the things that they want to move forward. There's a lot of times where subs will, often subs, sometimes doms, will push past their own boundary to be able to continue the scene and continue the engagement with this person, right? So your ability to know when that boundary is and honor that you can communicate it is going to be first and foremost the most important piece of being able to use kink as a healing mechanism. So if you're in a place where you are confident in that, you're comfortable in yourself enough to communicate those boundaries, enough to be aware, what is this cue? Then the next conversation is, how do you know what you want to be addressing in terms of healing? And I'm gonna share my screen for this one. This is gonna be a little annoying just because you're seeing it on Google Docs. That's not the one I want to show. Okay, so this is a little graph that I made to talk about the ways in which trauma shows up in our bodies. And so we want to think about 4 primary ways that trauma is going to be activated. One is you're currently experiencing abuse or harm in a relationship. Most often, trauma that's triggered in kink spaces is relational, meaning it happened in a relationship. So are you currently in any distress in your relationship? If you're in that middle circle, it's going to be much harder to use kink for a healing mechanism because you're currently being activated. You have to go home or you're in a space that's currently unsafe, which makes it really hard to work through healing that unsafety, that lack of safety. Second, is there a history of harm or abuse in your home, in your family, in your immediate circle or recent relationships? And that's one a little bit easier to work with because it is this space where we are helping you move through something that's in the past and you're currently hopefully in a safe container to do that work. Third, we want to talk about stress from oppression or communities current or past. So this can be stress around homophobia, transphobia, whorephobia, racism, sexism, oppression that is impacting your ability to like be yourself in your body, in your communities, in your families. And this one's sometimes more challenging in kink because we're dealing with a lot of like deeper psychological issues around identity, around who we are, how we show up in the world, how we want to be in our bodies. And then the larger last circle is systemic oppression. So all the forces around being human that make it hard to survive and how those might show up in play. So when you're first starting to negotiate, how might you tackle a trauma experience in kink spaces, you want to figure out what are the areas that you're trying to navigate? Where is your trauma? How do you map it? Which is this slide. You want to figure out how you're going to map what your trauma specifically looks like for you. And I have a resource I'll send to folks after this where you can kind of draw out for yourself. You're not going into super deep detail, but you're drawing out kind of the like big picture map. You know, I had some, for me, it's like there's some family shit and there's a boyfriend shit and there's a girlfriend shit and there's some stuff around safety in, you know, communities. You know, so you're mapping out where are the activations that might come up in my body. How do I know when those are coming up? What is their unique manifestation for me? You know, for me, when it's relational around like any kind of like sex or engagement with a cis hetero male, my body has an immediate like pit in my stomach and like what feels like radiating like butterflies moving through my body and usually like tightness in my chest, right? So that those are indicators. Those are not I'm just nervous or I'm anxious. That's my body shutting down because it feels unsafe, right? So knowing how your body maps it out, both in terms of experience of the words and the story, but also where is it in your body is the first starting point. Second is you want to confront and break up that initial stuckness within you. This is usually better done in therapy, but if you're hitting walls in therapy, it can be good to add kink at this stage, which basically is using that trauma experience as a reference point for the kink expression. And we'll talk a little bit about what that can look like. And then long-term kink can be utilized in the integration of the activation long-term. So basically you're trying to find, I'll show you in the next slide, you're trying to find how your body moves through the fluctuations when you move really high in activation versus really low in shutdown. And you want to be able to master the ability to move through that with ease, right? And so kink can be a place where you're dealing with such intense sensory information, right? Going from really extreme highs and lows. It mimics the same process as trauma, but in a controlled context in which your brain can then learn, how do I navigate that and move through it in an effective way? Okay, I know that was a lot of words. Questions so far? I'm sorry, my slides are not as helpful as they could be because of technology. Okay, I'm going to keep going because we have limited time, but feel free to, I'm happy to answer questions along the way, so feel free to post them. And I realize I can't currently see the, oh, here's the Q&A. So then the next piece of that, sorry, I'm jumping around on my slides. I'm going to give you a really short 3-minute trauma in our bodies. And this is going to talk a little bit about the neurobiology before we jump into the chemical responses. So everyone can see this slide okay? Okay. So you want to think about first this blue line. I hope there's no colorblind folks in here. I'm sorry if that's a problem. The blue line is sort of the baseline normal activation of humans, right? So we have a little bit of like, oh, I had a hard day and like things are a little bit stressful and I'm a little sad, right? But it stays within this window of tolerance, which is the dotted line, right? So humans have typical fluctuations of our nervous system, chemical electrical signals that move throughout our bodies. Some folks will have what we call single incident trauma, which is this pink line. So they're having kind of mostly like baseline, and then all of a sudden there's like one big spike. This could be a car accident. This could be a, one really like difficult experience in their life, but typically they come back to a baseline. Now there's folks who have what we call a complex trauma, developmental trauma, or what I think most of us actually suffer from, which is oppression. If we've had many, many periods of our life where we've had harm because of our identities, because of our experiences, because of our ways of being in the world, our baseline is much higher, which can look like the red or the green line. So instead of us being kind of like in a typical occasional fluctuation, we're much more likely to be constantly activated, which can look like always being stuck on or always being stuck off. The always stuck on alternative is pretty much anybody that has anxiety. That's a trauma response. Anxiety is trauma-based. Anxiety, rage, fear, impulsivity, difficulty with frustration tolerance, defensiveness, avoidance. And then in your bodies, that looks like pain, increased heart rate, high temperature, pupil dilation, adrenaline, cortisol, decreased immune response, and like intestinal issues, right? So when you think about how much of your day or your life do you spend in this space, and that happens beyond just a fight or flight response in a trauma activation, but this is kind of like your body's overall sense of well-being and how you identify with the world. And those that have the opposite, which is a more parasympathetic response, these are folks that have the more kind of like shut down, and that looks like depression, dissociation, fear, shame, numbness, trapped, helplessness, etc. And in that body, there's more increased endorphins, decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, lower temperature, more withdrawal and shutdown. And there are folks who oscillate between the two based on what the activation is. So now when you think about yourself, your own body, your experiences, where do you tend to fall? And maybe you're not at the extreme, but maybe I posted this number chart on the side. Maybe you're like a 3 or a -3. And how do you know your fluctuations, right? What are some of the things that can trigger or activate you moving towards one or the other? And how long do you stay there when you get there? Questions on kind of what this looks like in terms of trauma in the body. Any thoughts, reflections? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay. No worries, take your time. Okay. So the question is, so for my childhood trauma, trauma activation often looks like it is rooted in unmet expectations. So I imagine, as you say that you find that when there are expectations that you hold and they are unmet, then your body tends to go into shutdown around like not feeling safe in that connection. Yeah, certainly. And I think when we think about those oscillations, oftentimes it's not as extreme. Like we don't notice that we're in those kinds of places. And it is something as subtle as like, someone didn't come home on time, or someone changed the date at the time of a date, or, it can be really little things that are not actually traumatizing. I think that's one of the hardest things to understand about being a trauma survivor, is that most activation is not actually a traumatizing event. Like someone triggering us they aren't actually doing something that's harmful, but our nervous system is reacting as if it is, because it's impacting a part of our system that is deeply subconscious, right? So all of those responses I just showed on that chart are all responses that come from cues that your face is taking in, usually like facial features, things like someone's vocal tone, posture, words they say, and you're interpreting it immediately. Your vagus nerve, which is the part that impacts the parasympathetic response system, your vagus nerve interprets information through the HPA axis to your hippocampus and your amygdala. It interprets that information instantaneously before your frontal lobe even knows. So you can imagine kind of like the smart part of your brain is typically not receptive to safety related information because it doesn't have time to process it. It takes too long. So your lower brain, your vagus nerve, is immediately responding and already activated before you even know it, right? And so in that context of kink, we have the space where we need to know when that happens. And so the more cued in you are to, oh, these are kinds of the things that happen to my body, and this is what it looks like, then you can use it really effectively. So the more knowledge you have of your system, the more you can fuck with it. Does that make sense? So we actually will do things in kink where we are stimulating the vagus nerve. We're stimulating the same thing that is the shutdown mechanism, but we're using it to be transformative for healing, right? So when you think about, the vagus nerve, I'm gonna show showing you more pictures. Which ones do I have? Okay, I will give folks these too. This one. Okay, so in a trauma activation, your vagus nerve is typically increasing activation, and it has sort of two options, right? It can use the dorsal response, which is completely shut down, play dead is kind of the most extreme, or move to depression or move to just isolation. Oftentimes in kink, that looks like just compliance. Your vagus nerve is activated and you're just in kind of a I'm just going to be here. I'm going to comply and comply and comply to survive, right? And then you're no longer in your power. The other option of the vagus nerve activation is the parasympathetic, which is regulation. So when we feel safe and connected and close to the person we're playing with, which should be a criteria for someone you're going to play with around kink and trauma. When you feel close, you have the opportunity then to use that regulatory system to know that I'm safe, right? I give this example. I don't know who this person is. I should look up who they were. I was at a kink conference in Chicago one year, and I was watching this rigger tie up this person, and they had them bound and kind of half on the ground, half off the ground, and they're in a pretty strenuous position. And the rigger put a bamboo in one of the ropes, and then put their face about 2 inches from the bottom's face, and started to twist the bamboo so it tightened the rope. And they twisted and twisted and twisted, watching their partner's face. And the minute the person got to their edge, they pulled back, and then they would do it again. But it was this really interesting example of attunement with our partners, our ability to not only watch their faces and their emotions, but know them so well to know, when am I hitting that edge, right? And our bodies deeply crave those both erotic and sensory edges. But how do you do that where you're not causing, I've had experiences where the opposite happened. I thought I was playing within my boundaries, and I suddenly am having intense activation and shutting down. The most interesting example of that for me was I was tied to a bed, and then I had a little, had some panic and some trauma activation, and I tried to run away, could not run away. So I ended up just sliding my body enough so I could sit on the floor while I'm still tied to the bed and just curl in a ball and cry. And my partner luckily was a good human who, had some trauma awareness and could just sit and hold me and left me tied up because I wanted to be, but left me contained, you're okay, you're safe, you're held, right? So we want to figure out, how do we find those edges where we're not causing more activation, but even if we do, how do we hold it in safety? Yeah. I'm looking at the questions. And when it feels like a dom and submerged, going through a portal into another threshold, can there be feedback on that in the session, or should I ask? Yeah, so I think in terms of when you go through that place where you're in transcendence together, it's really beautiful and amazing. But I think one of the challenges is making sure everyone always stays in their power, even when you're in the kind of subspace or other kind of like distorted reality, right? So can you still know that no matter what's happening, you both can maintain your power? And yeah, I mean, that's why it is really healing and transformative. Our brains literally, that's what this slide is, our brains literally release some of the same chemicals in both trauma and kink into different degrees. One clarity on this is the cortisol can be both. In trauma, it can be both increasing as well as decreasing. It tends to increase during a trauma and then decrease later because your body's adapting to having to have adrenal fatigue, which means that your body is responding to too much cortisol and then it's shutting down and you're shifting your body's ability to regulate. But in kink, it's also released, manages stress and memory. Both trauma and kink, adrenaline and norepinephrine are released, which are both endorphins and an analgesic. So this is the like alleviating pain, helping you to move forward and keep going, which is another reason why you need to know your boundaries because you might push way past them when you have that analgesic effect. Trauma, you have lower oxytocin, whereas in kink, you have more. And this is the healing component, right? When you feel safe and connected, you can feel bonded to the person and feel like you are holding me in this container, even though we're always holding ourselves too. This person is holding us to keep us as safe as they can while helping us move towards edges we want to move towards. The VTA, which is the ventral tegmental area, and hippocampus connectivity, is the interaction between two chemical electrical parts of the brain that release dopamine, which encourages pleasure. So in trauma, this goes down, kink, it goes up. So you're basically trying to like, a good example, let's say that you're doing a like kind of edgy CNC rape scene, pre-negotiated, really clearly designated boundaries with a safe word. And you notice you're able to play with that trauma piece, right? This would normally be not a pleasurable experience, but you're adding in pleasure to it because you're creating power and control, right? So we always want to think about our goal in kink is to restore power and autonomy, that both parties always maintain their power and their autonomy and maintain a sense of safety and belonging, right? So even if I'm doing a really edgy, mean, difficult scene, am I still maintaining power, control, and belonging and safety? And how does that play out in that scene? And we see that in our bodies, right? Increased dopamine, increased pleasure. We already talked about the vagus nerve activation. And then the vasopressin is another chemical that helps increase closeness and helps increase blood pressure. So, and that goes up in both trauma and kink. So you ever notice when someone looks really flushed and is just like, like activated? That's both a trauma response as well as a kink response. So I say all this to say it's really fucking complicated and that I could talk, this is normally a 3-hour workshop. We could talk for days about the complexity of what your brain is doing in both traumatic experiences as well as in kink dynamics. But this is just a teaser to say it is really complicated and really similar. And so you want to do so with care. And you want to do so in a way that, again, having intense attunement to your own bodies, right? So the minute that you don't have attunement to your body, you're not going to do it well because you're just kind of like fucking around, right? So kink and trauma integration is much less about the acts. I don't give a fuck if you're spanking or tying or whipping or role playing. It doesn't actually matter what the act is. What matters is the experience in your body that you're trying to have. So think back to our first question when we first started today. What did you want your body to notice? What did you want to feel, right? And what steps will help you both use that as a healing tool, but also will help you get there and choosing your acts engagement based on that, right? The difference between just hitting someone and fucking them up and kink being useful, right, is that energetic exchange. Power exchange is always a complete circle of movement of energy from one person to another. It is never one person in control. And so the movement of energy provides this space where both people are constantly being able to check in, is my energy where I need it to be? Is it moving in an effective way? And is it connecting in the way that I need it to? Does that make sense? There's a question that says, what can you do if you were once very in tune with kink and your partner and you had one episode where it was heavily activated and now it's a struggle to feel connected and pleasure? Yeah, that's a really common problem, right? So kink can be both really healing and also can be a place of activation and can be really, really hard. And so what I say to folks is go back to square one, right? Pretend this is a brand new person you've never met and you're building safety again. So how can you establish really, really small scenes that are have maybe a little bit of touch, a little bit of power, but are done in such a way that everyone has the space to constantly titrate, which is the word we use in both clinical spaces as well as medical spaces. But you want to be able to titrate your responses. So go titration, basically easy definition, dip a toe in and pull back a little bit and pull back a little bit and pull back. So maybe, you know, you start with like a Wartenberg wheel on a back, and the minute you're activated, you take a pause and you reconnect. So the pause and reconnection is the safety building process. It's the like telling your nervous system, hey, wait, it's okay. Because our nervous system is constantly kind of lying to us because it wants to keep us safe. And it's doing the thing that it needs to do, right? Your nervous system wants to protect you no matter what. And even when it does wonky shit, right? So you're trying to tell it like, thank you for taking care of me. I really appreciate you. I appreciate this thing that you're offering to me, but this isn't fucking working right now because I want to be connected and this person is safe, right? So they're like, try a little and come back to connection, which with a partner can be really nice if it's the safe person you're playing with. I like the like, press your nose into their chest and just breathe with them. So you're not having to look at them. You're able to just be close to their body. You're feeling their nervous system calming. You're feeling their heartbeat. And that we're most often regulated in connection with another human because we have mirror neurons in our brains that mirror another person's affect, as well as our regulation system is always reading other people's cues. I'm sure you notice this when someone comes in a room and is like, ah, like all your bodies are like, right? Because we are really receptive to human cues, which is our vagus nerve. So connection with your partner, helping them help you co-regulate, taking a pause, stepping back to something that you do like, maybe a massage, maybe eating a snack, and then try again. So just go really, really slow and try as carefully as you can to walk towards something that would be helpful and pleasurable. Yeah, it certainly is a lot to condense and better with my slides. So I have a recording of this class actually that I can give to folks too, if they would like a recording that I do of my longer version. Let me see which slide I want to share now. Okay. I got one more for you, and then it'll just be my voice. Okay, so this is a image from the somatic experiencing therapy model, and I use it a lot actually in kink spaces because part of the goal of, sorry, my own body is dysregulated. You might take a breath. Part of the goal of kink is to, again, give yourselves this container for moving towards integration in complex ways, which can often look like needing to be much more embodied and much more aware than ever, right? If you're a really disconnected person who is often in la la land, like that's okay, that's who you are, and that's a thing for you to work through, but like often kink is not going to be a great space for that, because if you use kink as avoidance, if kink is your place to just escape, like I'm gonna go be a fucking like whipping person for this person and not be in my body at all, then it's not gonna work as a healing modality, right? Because you have to be able to be integrated with your own experiences, your own story, your own awareness of yourself and what you're trying to heal for it to be that thing for you. There's occasionally like a fluke where somebody randomly has a really healing, amazing experience, like which can happen in any time in our lives. But generally speaking, if you're going to do it in a planful way, you don't want it to be just sort of diving in without intent. So this is one way that you can use intent, which is using this image. So every time that you're thinking about activation, maybe there's a sexual assault activation you're dealing with, think about how these 5 elements show up. What are the sensations in your body? What do you see, smell, taste, hear when you have that memory? What are the emotions that come up? What is the meaning ascribed to it? I'm bad or wrong. I'm dirty. I'm not okay. My sex is bad. My sluttiness is bad. It's my fault. What's the meaning associated with it? What is the behavior? What does your body want to do? What is your body like seeking? What does it need to do? And what is the imagery? And then in a kink space, you basically can take these 5 elements and recreate it in a safe way. So one of the biggest ways that we can use rape or sexual assault fantasy in kink as a healing modality, which again, do really fucking cautiously with a therapist's help, one of the ways you can do it as a healing modality is to recreate some of the facets of it without the harmful elements, right? So you can recreate a sense of being taken, or a sense of it being like raptured, or being like really intensely like aroused, or intensely like sought after, or a little bit of like holding down or some pain, but doing so in a way that you are in control. You can say no at any point, you can stop it at any point, and you're designing it, right? And so in some ways, like it's a way to recreate power. I often say that kink in kink for healing can take three big roles. First is re-narration as repair. So basically retelling the story in a way that is, sorry, I changed the sharing. Retelling the story in a way that is healing for you, taking back your power, right? Remembering the moments within that story that you were fucking strong and powerful and capable, and that you were always fighting for yourself inside, even if you couldn't use your words, even if you didn't have the ability to fight or run away, right? Your body was still fighting for you, and you're able to recreate that in kink. Replicating an arousal pattern is the second way, I'm sorry. So re-narration as repair, replicating an arousal pattern. So like, I want to feel really taken. I want to feel really like, all I can think of is that kind of like rapture feeling that often comes with like intensity, right? Like the kink can kind of give us those spaces to feel that, but like we get to plan it, right? So recreating an arousal pattern, or just providing intensity, right? So sometimes the most intense moments we have in our lives are harmful. We were in a car accident, we were in a really like bad fight, we were in a bad relationship that had a lot of intensity, and that intensity is erotic, right? When you think about the Jack Moran's 4 cornerstones of eroticism, he talks a lot about the role of the taboo and the role of intensity as this place where our bodies are having the most arousal, because our vagus nerve, remember the nerve that connects our spine, connects our brain to our body, our vagus nerve also controls sexual arousal in collaboration with the hypothalamus. So those two together control our body's response to pleasure and to desire, which can also be activated by intensity. So all of it again to say it's really complex and difficult, and give your body a lot of patience to figure out which thing you're needing in order to recreate. Okay. I know I'm going really fast because it is a lot to move through. So a couple of ideas. This is just a couple of like things that I think are cool to try that can be helpful in terms of trying out fucking with like our brain mechanisms and kink. So one is vagus nerve stimulation. We talked about the vagus nerve, intensity, arousal. You can stimulate your vagus nerve through vagal toning, which is a vocal response. So your vagus nerve connects, imagine your nerve endings here, connecting into your throat, into your larynx, moving down into your heart and your lungs and all of your intestines, that nerve ending. So that nerve ending you can fuck with by sighing, screaming, yelling, doing weird breathing activities, which were all a part of kink, right? So when I first like learned that, I was like, oh, we're basically just already doing this, right? Like we're just already fucking with our vagus nerve. So yeah, good job, kinksters. Second thing is our brains have a really intense memory system. Every single, there's neuropeptides in your body, and they have peptide receptors, which are basically like little magical cues that fit together, like little puzzle pieces all throughout your body, and it lines all of your intestines, moves from your brain all the way through your body. And they're emotional cues that are receptive to the vibration of the peptide coming over it so that it can fit together. So when you start noticing what your emotional cues are throughout your body, you can fuck with them in kink as well. And I'll give references to all of this. That's from the book, The Molecules of Emotion. And then, as we already talked about, using body orientation and regulation skills, the more knowledge and tracking you have of your body, the more you can fuck with it in kink. I really like using things like rhythmic patterning and drumming, like drumming on bodies, using drumming or any kind of rhythm and repetition can be really good for nervous system regulation. So if you're activated, maybe moving to a different kind of play where you're just doing something rhythmic and repetitive that's not too intense, right? That can be really good for getting your body back to calm. Because you're imagining again that wave from the middle. You want to get your body back to a calm, regulated pattern. So yeah, that can be good with impact play. It can be good with any kind of like music or like, this is maybe not always all of the kinksters' favorite, but like eye gazing and like connecting resonance with the person. So like one thing that I had a partner who did sometimes, which fucked with me, but I really liked, is they would like sit really close to me and like twist my nipple and like, again, like breathe with me and like watch my reaction and like hold me really safely while they're like, okay, when are you hitting your wall? Right. So like that creates resonance, right? This closeness, this safety, this like, I know my boundaries are going to be held and cared for while I'm able to move through this kind of a connection. I really like also breath work. as a tool for kink play in kink and trauma, because as we just mentioned, right, your breath is connected to your heart, to your lungs, to that activation system. When we're turned on, our breath is really fast, we're getting ready to run or fight. When we're shutting down, our heart rate and our breath slows. One of the biggest factors in indicating vagal tone, which again, biggest or important one we're going to keep talking about, one of the important factors in measuring vagal tone is heart rate variability. So basically, the more complex, the more variable your heart rate is, the more resilient and capable it is of finding regulation in the future. So basically, you want to give your body more chances to have heart rate variability in a safe container. That's partially why exercise is really good for people, because you're kind of like forcing your body to like have your heart rate increase and come back and you feel safe. And kink can be a place where we can practice that too. And breath work is one of the great tools. Again, this is not a breathwork class, it's a breath play class, so please do that safely. But you know, a couple of seconds here and there, practicing what it feels like to not be able to breathe in that moment, but know that you're going to get it back, and what it feels like to take really deep, long breaths and feel breath down into your pelvis. Imagining your breath moving and filling up your pelvic bowl and then moving back out can really help with sexual trauma healing, because you're giving your body this space where, like, I often say that your breath is your most significant source of power, right? In any given moment, no matter what's happening to your body, you're being assaulted, you're being harmed, you're being humiliated, you have your breath, right? Your breath is your power. Your breath is your access to, this is still my fucking body. I'm in control of it. Even if I can't get out of the situation, I'm still contained and I'm held, and I get to hold me and I get to keep me safe no matter what happens, right? So using the breath as a tool can be really useful in kink for that. Also, like, role play is really neat. I tend to say, if you're going to role play with any kind of explicit trauma experience, don't role play the actual person. Do not role play daddy-daughter abuse, for example, if there was childhood sexual abuse. But what is better is to role play another, like, strong masculine figure to help heal the relationship to masculinity or to power, right? So you want to figure out how to, like, we don't want to recreate trauma, but we want to give space for healing your body's memory of the trauma. So we want to make a reflection that is held in safety, and give them a tool to move through it that feels really good and safe for them. Okay, making sure I didn't miss anything important. I also like CBT, not cock and ball torture, but CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, as a tool for kink in healing trauma. And basically what that would look like is you're helping re-story, re-narrate, or change thoughts about something. So if someone's like, I'm a piece of shit, I want to, I often question this with folks who are really into humiliation play, and I want to do some more studying with groups in that population. You know, if someone just wants you to reinforce that they're a piece of shit, how do they come back into belonging and safety after that? And what would it be like to maybe move out of the I'm a piece of shit language, right? To move towards, like, you used to think you're a piece of shit, but now you're fucking worthy and valuable, and I'm still in charge of you, right? So there's ways to maintain power without needing to maintain harm that happens very deeply in our psyche. So being able to change negative thoughts, change ideas about ourselves, change the view that our bodies are beautiful, our bodies are all of our bodies are sexy and worthy of pleasure and connection, no matter what our bodies are like, no matter what's happening in terms of our identities, like, we get to have access. And so using kink as a space to, like, reinforce that can be really beautiful. And I've seen that in a lot of amazing spaces in kink where, like, people don't really care what you look like sometimes. They just want somebody that, like, will go down this weird rabbit hole with them. And, like, that's a beautiful and amazing. And, like, how do we find those rabbit holes where we can be as expansive and big as we want to be, while also acknowledging those places where sometimes that expansion will hit on harm, and we need humans who can hold that with us. Kind of last thought on that is that if you're negotiating with a new partner, you should be negotiating around your trauma from day one, right? So I know that's hard sometimes in a dungeon, partly why I don't usually do pickup play unless it's with friends, because you just don't have space, right, to have a really long conversation about your trauma. And if I do pickup play, it's going to be really small. Like, we can just do a 5-minute spanking scene, no big deal. But if it's going to be something that's more intense, like, I want to have all the pieces of the puzzle, right? Because I don't want to step on any of your toes or traumatic experiences. And what would it look like to not give somebody all the details? You don't want to be telling everybody all of your trauma in their stories, but how do you give them the information, right? And usually what that looks like, what I recommend for clients is talk about what happens in your body, right? When my sexual assault trauma is activated, this is what it looks like. When my sexual assault trauma is touched on, these are some of the ways that it often happens. Right? So we're giving people kind of like the mile markers to to understand how it might come up, not all the details of the story. And in that, it can feel easier to talk about it all the time with people. Like I can talk to strangers about, hey, if you come in and start telling me what to do or put your hands on me without asking, I'm going to be activated. So like we have this space, right, where we get to start setting our own boundaries and feeling, again, going back to one of my first statements, healing trauma is about safety in ourselves and safety and belonging with each other. So the safety and belonging in myself is I know who I am and I know what I need, and I know my boundaries in my container, and I can reinforce it no matter what's happening. And then it's much more easy to have someone come close to it because I know exactly when they're hitting that, and I can feel safe in understanding what that can look like. If you're somebody who's new to kink and doesn't know anything about anything that I just said, don't dive into doing really intense things right away. Go really slow and just do it with trusting people. Like my first couple of years in kink spaces was just like my friends and I playing around and being silly and like not doing deep psychological work because every scene has the potential to be a mind fuck and you don't want to do it without care. Okay, 8 minutes for questions. What do you want from me? Sorry, that was a lot. I think maybe there's some.
You're amazing, Angie. I'm just going to refer you to, though, in the Q&A at the bottom, there are some questions that came up. I don't know whether you managed to cover those ones.
Yep, so I did that one already. Yeah, thank you for that question. So the question is, how do you handle systemic trauma coming up in kink, which would be trauma around depression, identity? I think what's helpful is to, again, talk about it with your partners in advance. Like, I don't do race play for that reason. I mean, there's very, very, very few situations I'll ever do really edgy identity related play because it is so fucking delicate and it can still come up, right? Even if we're not fucking with that exact element, it is still always a factor because there's so much erasure of Black and brown folks in kink spaces, of trans folks in kink spaces, and of this experience of folks with different abilities, this belief that like, your identity is negligible and is always relevant, right? We're always dealing with all the intersections of our identities in every experience that we have. So you need a partner who can hold that and who can understand what that might look like for you. I would also talk to partners about where there are maybe some places that you might want to fuck with it in a way that's going to be healing for you. Such as like, if you feel really disempowered around certain identity traits, what would it look like to feel empowered in them? How could you use a scene or an experience to highlight your strength, your wisdom, your courage, your capacity, versus kind of like stigmatized or socialized narratives about those experiences? And so I think, those are kind of just generalities, but if you notice it coming up, I mean, I think again, to be able to talk to our partners about it and notice what regulation looks like. The problem with things like post-slave syndrome and like intergenerational, like historical trauma is it's so deeply embedded that we don't often know what it is and what's happening. I often have like a sensory experience of like all the sexual assaults of all the women in my lineage, of every cis woman or every person in my history who's been sexually assaulted. Like I feel this like sensation of this connection to them. I'm a little woo and witchy, so it's probably more like my sensitivity to the world, but like I know that comes in even when it's not mine. And I need empathy and compassion. We all need this kind of like space to be our whole selves. And if we don't get to be our whole selves in kink, then what the fuck are we doing there, right? Like that's one of the few places where all the weird, all of the intricacies should have space to be held. And there's always going to be somebody you could find who will want to do that with you. Did that answer it?
You are ace. You are brilliant. Yes, I think you did very well. There's been quite a few comments of people that they'd like to know how else they can get in touch with you, or so if you wouldn't mind putting some details in the chat to all attendees, just if anyone wanted to get in touch with you after this to get further information on your services.
Totally.
There's quite a few people that want to see the whole seminar. Or maybe doing this over a long-term setup. So if you can put your contact details in. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I'm actually doing, kink.com has hosted me doing this workshop, and we're doing a 2-part series of this coming up soon. So that would probably be the best thing to go to for folks. And I'll get folks the details of those.
There's a few more questions that are in the Q&A. There's a couple here that have just come through. So one anonymous attendee: I'm not open as a sub yet, but I'd like to try it. I feel you are really good in it. Is there a way to have an online session with you? So again, someone who wants to
okay, I'll give all the
contact.
I'll give all the information at the end. And then in terms of the CPTSD, sexual assault activation, so in terms of like sexual trauma survivors, if you're having difficulty with regular sex, with the P and the V, or with any kind of like just typical sex behavior, I think kink actually can be a better space for working through it, because you can, again, if you're doing kink safely and well, you're spending a lot of time in advance negotiating every single aspect of it. How do you like to be touched? What does that touch feel like? What's the intensity? What's the pressure? What's the language you want me to use? What are the words you say when you want me to pause? So it can give a lot better of a container, I think, than just sex. So even if you're just using kink as a container for like practicing consent and boundaries and words, it's a great place for that. And then how sometimes I feel like a dom. Yeah. I think that we are all powerful, energetic beings. And so often like there is not a like one designation, and I try to stay away from like the need to be a thing. And instead I just listen to your body. Like in this moment, I'm more dominant. In this moment, I'm more submissive, and we're very responsive to other people's energy, right? So the type of human you're engaging with, the gender, the identity, the power dynamics, every single human interaction is a power dynamic. And so the more awareness we have of it, we just name it and call it, and then engage with it in a way that suits us.
There's one question about whether there's any sort of books that are related to psychological domination. Is there anything you can recommend, or anything that you've read in the past that you'd like to suggest?
Yeah, I'll add a list. There's a bunch of them. So I'll add a list to the resources link that I send over. I'm actually working on a book on this subject, Kink for Trauma. So it should come out hopefully next year. So I will let folks know too when I have this book done.
I think you're really going to appreciate some of the questions and the stuff that's in the chat at the moment, because everybody is giving you absolute kudos. You've done so well. You're awesome. Best seminar I've ever had. So thank you so much for all your time. If anyone's got any last final questions that they want to fire at Angie, so let's have a go. I think that's last on the Q&As have come through. But no, thank you so much. And like I say, if you can put your details into the comments box, we do have previous work that we've done with Angie before, and hopefully we'll be able to put some details on our YouTube channel or updates so that you can see some of these again at a later date. But hopefully we'll be having you on again at another event like this super soon.
And my easy to find me, connectedtherapycollective.com, Connected Therapy Collective on all the social media. And I'm also leading a sex work certification for therapists who want to learn to treat sex workers. So that's equitablecarecertification.com. So those are the two places to find me.